Hi, this video is going to walk you through task 3 of the Early Childhood edTPA commentary and scoring rubric. So task 3 is all about an assessment that you've given related to the learning segment that you planned. So this one starts up here. It says respond to the prompts below, no more than 10 spaces by typing your responses in the brackets. Don't delete the prompts. Can't exceed 10 pages or they won't score it. You can attach the assessment. You should attach the assessment that you use to evaluate your students' performance, but it can't be more than 5 pages to the end of this file. So at the end of this file, they actually want you to include the assessment. So that goes at the bottom of your commentary, which is a little bit confusing. The assessment also gets uploaded when you upload your edTPA into something called, I think it's called evaluation criteria. That's also the assessment instrument. So that's the rubric or the checklist or the exit ticket or whatever you use to grade your students, that instrument gets uploaded. And then it says if you submit evidence of learning, a student work sample, or feedback as a video or audio clip. So if your evidence of the student's learning, for example, if it's oral evidence, that would be in a video or audio clip, and you or your focus students can't be heard, you can also include a transcript of the inaudible comments, but you can't have more than 2 pages of that. And that also goes at the end of the document. So these additional 5 pages and 2 pages, if you're doing the video, don't count in your commentary limits of 10 pages. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to know about this. So the second thing you need to know is that you're going to focus on 2 focused children here, and they need to be focused children that are from that context for learning chart that's at the beginning of your whole thing. So pick 2 of the kiddos on that chart. They should be in your assessment video if you would included a video. If not, you're just going to write about them. And then they also want you to talk about your whole class. So you've got the class and or the group, because remember, class and small group are kind of the same thing for the edTPA. So you don't have to have the whole class, but your whole small group, and then your focused children. So this task is going to go back and forth between the whole group and the 2 focused children. So the first one is to identify the specific language and literacy learning objectives for the common assessment that you chose for analysis. This is right off the lesson plan. So you would write something like, the assessment I am analyzing is from lesson fill in the blank, whatever it may be. The objective for this lesson was, and then literally put the objective in. So that's like the frame of that, and that's as simple as it needs to be. For this one, they want a graphic or a narrative description that summarizes the entire group's learning for that common assessment. And here is where it's really helpful to go out to the rubric. So I'm on page 32 of this rubric. They have different levels of expectation for how you're going to grade your students. I think it's helpful here to start with the key concepts. So your assessment has to be aligned. If your assessment is not aligned, it is an automatic 1. What that means is that your learning objective that you just had to state in part A must actually align to the assessment. So that's why it's good to write learning objectives that end with the criteria from your assessment. So for example, the students will be able to identify descriptive language, or students will be able to use descriptive language in their writing pieces in order to earn 3 out of 4 in all categories of a rubric. So that's why a good learning objective will have that criteria at the end, so that work of alignment is already done for you. So I highly recommend, if you don't have learning objectives in that format, that you format them that way. And that will help you with this, getting that alignment to keep you from getting an auto 1. Then your evaluation criteria, this is just the instrument that you're using, should indicate the differences in levels of performance. So for example, a rubric is the perfect edTPA assessment. I highly recommend, if you did not design a rubric, that you do. Because rubrics allow you to say a level 1 would get this score, a level 2 would get this score, a level 3 would get this score. Super easy, clear, done for you, and just part of the design of a rubric. A checklist needs to have the desired attributes that you're looking for, and like maybe you're looking for 2 out of 3 of these attributes or 3 out of 4. That needs to be super clear at the top of your checklist. And then of course there's the traditional point system. You are welcome to do, like if you made an exit ticket, students will earn 3 out of 4 points on the exit ticket in order to show mastery, and that would be your learning objectives. That would be part of your learning objective. Summative grades alone, like they got an 8 out of 10 or they got an A, are not enough for evaluation criteria. It must be relevant to the learning objective, though they may also include attention to other desired features of the assessment response, like neatness and spelling. Like if there's other things that you've taught about, you can put it in your objective, but it really needs to align. You can't give them a journal response looking for their use of descriptive language and only score them on neatness and spelling. It must be relevant to that learning objective. Okay, so that's just a little snippet on good assessment design. So then at a level 3, this rubric is looking at prompts 1A through D. So all of these are on your first rubric. And the first one's pretty simple. The second one, a table or chart. So let's see what they're looking at for that analysis. So at a level 3, your sources of evidence from the focus children are used to support an accurate listing of what the children did correctly and incorrectly related to language and literacy development. At a level 3, the candidate must address both strengths and needs. So you can see there's a bunch of ands here. What the kids did correctly and incorrectly, the strengths and needs of each focus child, but maybe you don't have an equal level of analysis for both focus children. What sometimes happens here is people are like, focus child 1 got everything correct, great job. Focus child 2 missed this, got this right, did this wrong. And they list way more because one kiddo just does really well on the assessment. It would be best to have 2 students who have things that are both strengths and needs for your focus children. So be intentional about who you choose for your focus children in this task, and choose students who have both good things going on and things that have demonstrated a little bit of need. This bullet, the analysis is aligned with the evaluation criteria of the assessed learning objectives. So your actual instrument needs to line up with what you've taught, and that's part of this automatic 1. If there's not alignment, you can get a 1. Some differences in children's learning across the whole class or group are also identified through an analysis of the common assessment. So this would be like letter B that we're looking at. And then this last bullet is really for part B. A graph or a chart or a written summary of the performance of the children in the whole class is included to provide evidence of the range of performance. So these are the things that you really need to be focusing on for this question, and each one of these prompts kind of aligns to different bullets. So here I would highly recommend that you create some kind of a table that shows whole class scores on the rubric or whatever assessment that you used. And this is level by level, how many students got each score. So for example, that would sound like this. 3 out of the 8 students scored at the mastery level on the rubric a score of 3, okay? 2 of the 8 students scored above mastery at a level 4 on the rubric. Okay, and you would continue in that fashion, talking about who scored above, who scored below, who scored on the level of the rubric that you've set as mastery, and that needs to match your learning objectives. So if you said that your objective of the lesson is students will be able to use descriptive language in their writing to earn 3 out of 4 on all categories of a scoring rubric, this analysis should match up with that. So mastery, the mastery level would be 3 out of 4, and that's how I wrote this one. So 3 out of the 8 students scored at the mastery level, 2 out of the 8 students scored above mastery, and then the remaining, let's see, 3, 4, 5, the remaining 3 students would get below level, would get a 3 on, or less than a 3 on the rubric. Okay, so this is summarizing the data. Now, what I've done right there is just a simple qualitative description of the student's data, and you can do it in a narrative form like this, but I think a table that shows what they did is a nice way to show it. Okay, so then part C, use the class or group summary that's provided here. So use this table here to analyze the pattern. So this is probably the most important prompt in this one, and this is what can make or break you. So going back to here, when you're talking about the whole class, excuse me, I have a little cold, you're going to talk about some differences in their learning across the whole group. And then we already did the charter graph. Where's the thing that I'm looking for? Oh, the strengths and needs come here. Okay, so some differences in children's learning across the whole group are identified. And I think at a level 4, they want something different. Here it is. This is what I was thinking about. Above a level 3, so at a level 4, your analysis goes beyond listing, that's focus students. Where's the whole group? Whole group, whole group. Here, specific examples from the sources of evidence are used to demonstrate the patterns of learning. I'm actually going to copy this and bring it over here. So here is where you would write, reiterate the number of students who scored at each level, and add, I don't know what happened to my font here, sorry. Add specific examples from the sources of evidence to demonstrate the patterns of learning. So this might sound like 3 students scored below mastery on the scoring rubric. They scored at this level because they did not, I don't know, make this align to the rubric. An example off the top of my head might be they did not use at least one descriptive word in their writing. They did not write incomplete sentences. And they did not include an illustration. So these are bad examples, but make this align to what your scoring rubric said. So they scored at this level because they did not use at least one descriptive word. So these would be the things that describe out a level 1 on your scoring rubric. And then you would go into the example. For example, one of the students wrote the following in his narrative piece. And you would actually insert quote from the student's work. That inserting of a quote is what's going to get you up to a level 4 on this rubric. So it's not hard to do, but you need to remember to put in the actual evidence and then do this again for on grade level, on mastery, and above mastery. So basically you're going in and putting in like how you know the students scored at the levels they did, listing off the things that are on your rubric, and then providing a good piece of evidence to demonstrate this pattern. So the patterns are that a bunch of students were below mastery, a bunch of students were on grade level, and a bunch were above. And the mastery and the evidence for that is going to be direct quotes from their actual writing samples. Okay, let's see what else we're looking at a level 4. Below. So their example, as a whole, the group struggled with sentence starters. Ooh, that's another good way to start. So start this with, as a whole, the group struggled with fill in the blank. Fill in something that everybody needed a little bit of help with. Gosh, why do I keep doing that? Sorry. Only 3, and then go into only 3 children got a score of 10 or higher, blah, blah, blah. 5 out of the 10 use the starter words, put them at the end. It is unusual for so many children to score so low on writing sentences. When we talk together as a whole, and when I talked to the individual students, the majority of them were able to use the starter words. I also observed both focus children using them when practicing saying their sentences to their partners. It seems that the children understand how they should be used when speaking, but not actually when writing their sentences. The starter words had never appeared in their writing booklets before, so children might have been confused rather than helped by their presence. This is what they're talking about here. Areas of learning that need greater attention. So I think that I would actually put that response here. So I feel like this is a good example. Specific examples are used to demonstrate the patterns of learning. Patterns of learning are definitely in this one, but it's also down here for the focus children. So this is like a mix of C and D. Statements like this belong here in part C, but statements like this belong in part D, where you're analyzing the focus students' patterns. So I'm going to just drop that there. Okay, so basically what they want you to do in part C is to talk about the patterns that you see in your assessment data for the entire group, and then insert really good examples. I think this is Arial. I have to do this. It drives me nuts. Okay. The next one is analyzing the patterns of the 2 focus children, referencing the 3 sources of evidence that you collected for each of the focus children. So you've got a bunch of evidence that you're collecting for your focus children, and here they want you to talk about their strengths, what they understand and what they do well, and their areas of learning that need attention, their weaknesses. For example, common errors, confusions, or for your students who were advanced, a need for greater challenge. If you had a student who just crushed it, one of your focus kiddos just nailed it, you need to talk about how you could challenge them more. So this one is really just focusing on your 2 focus students, I want to read the rubric and see at a level 3 what they say again about the focus children. So sources of evidence from the focus children are used to support an accurate listing of what they did correctly and incorrectly, and strengths and needs. So this I'm actually just going to cut, copy, and paste. So it's a reminder of what's going to go in here based on the rubric. So the 2 focus students completed the following 3 sources of evidence. And here's where you're going to list them. So you start off by just telling what the sources of evidence are that you're using. Both of the students did blank. Talk about what they both did. Student 1 did blank. And here's where you're going to talk about patterns in student 1. Student 2, and here's where you're going to talk about patterns in student number 2. When you're talking about your patterns in student 1, include, and this is going to get you going back up to that level 4, include their scores, what they did well, or strengths, and what they are still learning or need support in. And that will get you up to a level 4 here. So for a level 4, your analysis goes beyond a listing of their successes and errors. So include their scores, good and bad, and what they did well and what they're still learning. An exhaustive list of what the children did right or wrong. The percentage correct or incorrect should be scored at a level 3, as this does not constitute a pattern of learning. A pattern of learning goes beyond these quantitative differences to identify specific content, understandings or misunderstandings, or partial understandings by the focus children that are contributing to the quantitative differences. So this next part is all a good example of how to go beyond just this one got a 3 out of 4, this one got a 4 out of 4. And to do that, you're going to analyze with specific examples from their evidence sources what their strengths and needs were. So you've just listed what they did well, strengths. I'm going to add here with data examples. So that would be something like student number 1 was able to use at least 3 descriptive words correctly in his narrative writing. For example, the student wrote, it was a sunny, warm, and muggy day outside. The 3 descriptive words that they used were sunny, muggy, I forgot the other one I said. So put in exact quotes that show that that's a strength. And then also do, and what they're still learning, their needs with data examples. This will get you to a level 4 if you say, so student 1 was really good at that, but student 1 is also still learning to write in complete sentences with proper mechanics. For example, when they wrote the sentence, blah, 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 they didn't use a capital letter or put a period at the end. Those are signs that the student is still emerging or needs some support in mechanics of writing a proper sentence. Something like that. So you're going to do that for student 1. You're going to do that for student 2, talking about the things that the score that they've got, the patterns that you see in their data, and then what they did well with example and what they need more support in with an example. Do that for both of your focus students and you will be good to go. So let's see, what else did I put in here? Sources of evidence are used to support an accurate listing. At a level 3, you do strengths and needs. So you must have strengths and needs for your focus students. And then at a level 4, this is just an example. Goodness, so many mistakes. I also observed both focus children using them when practicing saying their sentences. I think this would actually be better in part C. See, I have studied this extensively and I still have a hard time figuring out what goes where. But remember, you don't have to worry too much about what goes where because your scorer has been trained to look at your entire document when they're scoring task 3. They're going to look at all of your writing and they're allowed to score you if you put it in the wrong place for that rubric. Okay. The last thing is if video or audio evidence of learning or a work sample in a video occurs, provide the name of the clip and clearly describe how the scorer can identify the focus children. If you didn't do this, you can just put not applicable. So if you didn't video record, just do NA. Okay, so that's question 1. There's a lot there. It's really just asking you to look at patterns and talk about your students' data. Think about INEC 520 and all of that data analysis that you had to do on students running records. Like that's the level of analysis you need to be doing on your students' work samples. And if you can do that level of analysis, you could easily get a 4 on this rubric. I'm not even gonna look at level 5 because I can't right now. Okay, so prompts 2A and B, these ones, are for the next rubric. So this is the feedback that you give to guide their further learning. Referring to specific evidence of submitted feedback to support your explanations, they want you to identify the format in which you submitted your evidence of feedback for the 2 focused children. This is just a choose one. So I think most people are going to have this. They've written directly on their work samples. If you are in a pre-K, kindergarten classroom, you might not write your feedback to them, but if you're in 1st or 2nd grade, absolutely written directly on their work samples. You could also do a separate document that was given to them, like if they submitted their writing to you and you scored it with a rubric, your feedback might all be on that rubric document. Likely you're going to have some feedback also in their writing sample, so you might have to upload both of them. If a video occurs, describe the context, clearly describe how the scorer can identify the focus children. So this again, if you don't have a video, is an NA. So part B, explain how the feedback provided to the 2 focus children addresses their individual and developmental strengths and needs relative to language and literacy. There's a lot going on in this response because you have to talk about each of your focus children, their developmental and individual strengths and needs, and then literacy and language. Okay, so let's look at the rubric. Let me just quickly look. Part 2A and B. So the entire rubric is based only on this one prompt because this one is really just select, so that's not gonna affect your score. It's all of your writing on B. So this one's super important to nail. Okay. Your feedback can include written or verbal questions, responses, and or advice provided directly to the children by the candidate. If you have content flaws in your feedback, like if you just say something wrong, like you need a comma here and it's not grammatically correct to have a comma there, and you have a significant amount of them, you could get an automatic 1 on this. And developmentally appropriate feedback addresses concepts, skills, or procedures well above or below the content assessed, or your feedback is not appropriate for the developmental level of the child. So if you're in pre-K and you give them a written feedback, or you're in kindergarten and you give them like a 95%, they're not going to understand that. So your feedback needs to be appropriate developmentally for them. And also, if you have English language learners, you need to accommodate for them in your feedback. Okay, so those are the ways that this could go wrong and you could get an automatic 1, but you're not going to do that. And so at a level 3, you have evidence that the feedback for both focused children identifies specific strengths or needs. So this is one of those rubrics where if you and it, you're going to get up to a level 4. So definitely and it. So your feedback needs to focus on strengths and needs for improvement. Although the candidate may not necessarily provide the same type or amount of feedback to focused children, that's fine. At a level 3, the candidate must provide the focused children with qualitative feedback. That means like words or stickers or stamps or some sort of qualitative way of telling them, not necessarily a score. You're looking in the early childhood edTPA for qualitative feedback that is aligned with the learning objectives. So again, this needs to align with what you're teaching in your entire edTPA segment. So you're not giving them feedback on their behavior. You're not giving them feedback on their math skills if it happens to come up. You're really focusing solely on that language and literacy objective that you wrote. Your specific feedback can include such things as questioning, pointing to successful use of vocabulary or the strategy you used, naming a type of question answered correctly, pointing to and naming errors, suggesting information that would help answer questions successfully, check marks, points deducted, grades, or scores are not going to meet a level 3. If you just give them a 3 out of 4 and you don't explain qualitatively, you will get a level 2. So at a level 2, you're just saying things like check marks for correct responses, a loss of points, smiley faces with comments like watch out for punctuation that's not linked to a specific strength or need. So this would be general feedback like check your work or yes. Those are superficial levels of feedback, and you want to go beyond them with your students for this task. So let's just check out above a level 3. Each focus student gets feedback that's specific, related to the learning objective, and it focuses on their strengths and their needs for improvement based on the objective. So this is one of the ones where you're going to and it. And then addresses both strengths and needs aligned to learning objectives. For example, you did a great job listing 3 facts from the story. Please check your spelling. Remember to use our word wall if you aren't sure how to spell a word. And then at a level 5, you're going to give them a strategy to address the specific need, including the need for more challenge if your student has that. So for example, you wrote down the correct words next to the pictures. Next time, you can show me even more of what you can do by writing a complete sentence instead of just the word. Remember to use your capitalization and punctuation rules. Okay, so to structure this one, I would start it with, for focus student number 1, that's not the word focus. And actually, I think I would start like this. All students received a rubric back with their score and my feedback clearly written. For focus student 1, my feedback included a quantitative score of blank and qualitative feedback about his strengths and needs. The qualitative feedback about his strengths is seen in my comment, and then you would have something like a comment like, go back to here. You wrote down the correct words next to the pictures. So that would be qualitative feedback about his strengths. The qualitative feedback about his areas in need of support is seen in my comment, and then this is where you put that next time you can show me. So do some like next time blah blah blah, and if you don't have this on your assessments already, put it on there so that you can make sure that you've got this feedback. Make sure you use capitalization. So then I would sum it up by saying this feedback allowed the student to see the things he did well and also the ways that he could improve. Additionally, I provided a strategy for this student, and then this would be the level 5 one. For this student to extend in his development of writing. He was prompted to write complete sentences using proper mechanics, a strategy that will push him, that will challenge him to grow in his writing. So trying to connect explicitly back to that objective. So you can see this response. All students received a rubric back with clear feedback written. For focus student 1, quantitative score of blank, qualitative feedback based on strengths and needs, and then you're going to lay it out. The qualitative feedback about his strengths was seen in this comment, direct quote about how you talked about the strengths. Needs relative to language and literacy development, you can say next time. I would actually start with one area you can think about working on is, and then like really explicitly spell it out to the student. So one area you can think about working on is writing complete sentences. And again, this needs to match up with the rubric that you've created. So you've created a rubric, it's got complete sentences. He didn't really do that. Next time you can show me even more by writing a complete sentence instead of just a word. Remember that you can use capitalization and punctuation. So this feedback allows the student to see the things that he did well and also the ways he could improve. And additionally, I provided a strategy for the student to extend in his development of writing. He was prompted to use complete sentences, proper mechanics, and this will challenge him to grow in his writing. Okay, so that is a fully developed focus student 1. And then you do the same thing for focus student number 2, and then repeat with different feedback for focus student 2. And you should really have like varied feedback, even though in teaching you're going to just like cut and paste all the time, but you should have different feedback for focus student 2. Okay, so that is a really important response, and it's also one where you could easily get a level 5. What's this one? A meaningful connection to prior learning. Oh, that's another way. I noticed in yesterday's lesson you were able to identify only some characters. Today you remembered all of them. You've learned a tool to help you remember more details. That's another good way. Could also include mention of growing on prior learning. And then an example of that I'm just going to paste here for you to see. So that's another way that you could write that response. So lots of options there. What's most important is that that feedback has to actually be written on the student's work. So you probably didn't write that when you graded the student's work the first time. Maybe you just gave them a score, but make sure you go back before you scan and upload everything for the edTPA and write this feedback in this way. Growing on the strengths, talking about the needs, coming up with a clear strategy or a clear connection to how they're growing on their prior learning. So things like, I noticed that you used to do this and now you're doing this. Way to go. You've got a good tool. So that's going to get you, like, you could get a level 5 on this rubric, but it's all about writing that feedback to your student. Okay, so part C, describe how you will support each focus student to understand and use this feedback to further their learning related to the objectives, either within the learning segment or at a later time. So this is very specific, and this is another one that has its own rubric. There's no auto 1, which is nice. But at a level 3, you are describing how the focus children will either understand or use. This is another one of those and situations. If you only talk about how you're going to help them understand it, you get a 3. If you only talk about how they're going to use your feedback, you get a 3. Your description needs to relate to the feedback given to one or more of the focused children. And I bet at a level 4, it's both of them. Needs for the focused children. No evidence of feedback at a level 4. Support for the focused children, so both of them. So I would talk about both of them, how they understand and use the feedback on their strengths or needs. And guess what? A level 5 is their strengths and their needs related to the learning objectives. So for example, you might describe teaching the focused children a poem or another mnemonic to help them correctly remember a concept or skill with which they had difficulty. Okay, so this is how I would structure this one. Description should be specific enough that you understand what the candidate or the focused children are going to do, otherwise it's vague. So for example, understanding, candidate goes over the new words that the focused children had difficulty reading and how they can be decoded. Sorry, that's my cat telling me that he wants food. Candidate reminds children of the specific decoding skills that they used when they successfully read a new word. So here's an example of strengths and needs, and you're going to and those because you want to get a level 4. Oh, wait, sorry. This is anding. So you want one of each of these. So the first one is understanding feedback. How are you going to help your children to understand the score that they got and the feedback that you wrote to them? You have to have some way of telling them how they did. And this can be you're going to go over it with them. You're going to remind them of things when they successfully read a new word. And then the second part is how are you going to help them to actually use the feedback? So one is understand it. The second one is how are they going to use it? And this is asking them to do something new with it, asking them to read with words that they've already practiced on. And then this one is set up, understanding. Candidate describes, planned supports for the children. How you will support at a level 4. How they will understand and use strengths and weaknesses. Okay. There's no example for a level 5. But so I would break this down. So first talk about how you helped the students to understand the feedback. To help the students understand the feedback on their writing piece, and then explain what you did. Did you conference with them? That's a good one. That's an easy one. Did you conference? Did you ask them to explain it to you? I would say go with the conference. It's the easiest one. I sat down with each of them and I had a conversation about it. And then for focus student 1, and here is where you're going to talk about how you built on their strengths and weaknesses to help them use and understand. This is such a ridiculous response. So implemented supports for the focus children to understand and use feedback based on their strengths and needs. Okay, so for focus student 1, I gotta keep looking back. Planned or implemented support for the students to understand and use their feedback based on their strengths and weaknesses. So to help the students understand the feedback, I conference with them. To help them to use the feedback I gave them, I plan to, how can you have them use? Teaching the focus children a poem or another mnemonic to help them correctly remember a concept or a skill. Okay. Understand, goes over the new words the focus children have had difficulty reading and how they can be decoded. Okay, so each one of these has to have strengths and needs. So understanding feedback to help your conference with them. We're going to enter down. And then I would say, I went over, so this is just an example, new words for the focus children, new words that the focus children had difficulty reading and how they can be decoded, building on their needs. So this one's really got to follow from what you wrote back here in their needs. So let's say you found a need was that they, the focus children were unable to use many descriptive words in their writing. So if we're using that as an example, I went over descriptive words that the focus children have had difficulty writing and how they can be encoded is what you do when you're writing. And to build on their needs. To build on their strengths, I reminded children of the specific spelling skills they used. I reminded children of so this would be maybe like the sense of the specific senses strategy they used when they successfully came up with descriptive words for the group writing, something like that. So that's helping them to remember so that they can then apply that in their understanding of the feedback. So reminding them, oh, you have a strategy for this, don't forget that. Okay, so helping them to use the feedback. This one's down here. Let's see if we can modify this. Helping them use the feedback I gave them. I asked the focused children to read a new passage that contains words that they missed earlier. So how can we build on their needs? I asked the focused children to read a new passage that contains many good descriptive words as they were unable to come up with them in their writing pieces. And this review could help them remember the kinds of words they could use. And then to build on their strengths. So I would add one more sentence here. This would reteach them about sensory words and strengthen their writing. And then to build on their strengths, I asked the children to read new words using similar decoding skills. I asked the children to read new passages with sensory descriptive language, and we kept an ongoing list of the new words that they could use in order to write more descriptive pieces. Okay, so that's how I would structure this one. I'm not sure if you've got to be super specific to your focused children. Describe how you will support each focused child. How is this one? So you're supposed to do this for each focused child. That is shenanigans. I will have student B at a level for the candidates. Planned or implemented support. Yeah, so that's got to be repeated to help revise focus student number 1. Understand the feedback. Oh wait, no, that's not revised. To help the students, to help both focus students understand the feedback, I had individual conferences with them to go over and make sure they understood what I wrote. I went over, so then here for focus student number 1, I went over blah, 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 this build. I went over that the focus student had difficulty writing and how they can be encoded to build on his strengths. I reminded him of the specific census strategy he used when we successfully came up with. And then for focus student number 2, and then new description of what you did for focus student 2 to help focus student number 1 use the feedback I gave them. I asked, let's say this one is a girl, her to read a new passage that contains many good descriptive words, as she was unable to come up with them in her writing pieces, and this review writing piece, and this review could help her remember the kinds of words she could use. This would reteach her about sensory words and strengthen her writing. To build on her strengths, I asked focus child number 2 to read new passages with sensory descriptive language, and we kept an ongoing list that she could use in order to write more descriptive pieces. Sorry, this should be 1, and then you're going to repeat this for focus student number 2, and then you're going to repeat everything that you did for focus student 1. So this answer is going to be quite long because you need a whole, so this is for focus student 1. You basically need a repeat of that for what you're going to do for focus student 2 in terms of how they will understand the feedback, how you can help them to understand the feedback that you gave. And then this paragraph on how they're going to use the feedback is, this is all about focus student 1, and then you need to repeat the same structure for focus student 2 with new information on how you're going to help them to actually use the feedback. So this paragraph is talking all about what comes after your lesson, the next steps, and how you're going to make sure that these 2 focus students are doing good things and using good strategies that build on their strengths and their needs beyond your lesson. Like, how can they use your feedback to grow as learners? Okay, that is that entire rubric focused on 1. This one is all about prompt 3, which only has 1 part. So wow, each of these prompts has its own rubric. This task is all the questions are super important individually. So when you're responding to prompts below, use concrete examples from your video clips and or the student work samples as evidence. Evidence from the clips may focus on 1 or more children. So you have the option here. You can either upload, you can have 1, 2, or 3 of the following. You can upload a video, or you can refer to a video clip from task 2 using timestamp references for evidence of the student's vocabulary use. You can provide an additional file that you call vocabulary use, no more than 5 minutes, that has your students actually using vocabulary. Or you can talk solely about the student's work samples that you've analyzed in this task and cite their vocabulary use. If you did a writing edTPA, I would highly recommend that you just use the students' work samples. So what they want you to do here is explain how the children were able to use the key vocabulary that you already wrote about to support their learning of the content. And this little note says this vocabulary was identified in task 1 and refers to the developmentally appropriate sounds, words, phrases, sentences, and paragraphs that children use. So go back to what you wrote in task 1, and now they want to know what evidence do you have that the students were able to actually use that key vocabulary that you taught them? Okay, there's no auto 1 for this rubric, so that is good. At a level 3, you're going to explain and identify evidence. Those are two different things. Explaining your evidence is talking about it. Identifying the evidence is putting it down and actually showing it. That the children used or attempted to use the identified vocabulary. Use of vocabulary can include children correctly verbalizing or writing the words, or correctly answering questions when the candidate says or writes the vocabulary. Attempted use includes verbal and written attempts, as well as attempts to understand the candidate or writing the words or reading them on a worksheet. So any evidence that you have that they can use that vocabulary that you identified in task 1. The evidence addresses children's use of vocabulary associated with the learning experience. It's not sufficient to point to the artifact and make a general statement. So you can't say, as seen in the work samples, the children used the vocabulary I taught. That's not going to get you a 3. You must explain how the children used, attempted to use, or were unable to use the identified vocabulary. So for example, you would say, Child 1 and 2 used the vocabulary and also explicitly connected it with the text we read. Child 1 was unable to use blank word correctly when. So this is how you're going to, I'm going to cut and paste this. This is really important to this prompt. So this prompt is going to start with the evidence that the children can use the vocabulary from this learning segment is found in the students' work samples. So first, back up. The vocabulary, the key vocabulary for this learning segment is the following, and then list the words or the vocabulary. The evidence that the children can use the vocabulary from this segment is found in the children's work samples. And then you're going to actually include direct quotes from their writing of them using the vocab. It doesn't say you have to use your focus students here, so I think you can actually use anybody. You can focus on one or more children here. It doesn't say that you have to work with just your focus kiddos. Okay, so then, that's ugly. That's not much better. I wanted to bring this over. So for example, let's see if this can paste. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, so remember that you have to come back here. Child 1 and 2 used the vocabulary and also connected it with the text we read. Child 1 was unable to use. So you can say, Child 1 and 2 were able to use the words blank correctly, which were directly from the books we read previously. Child 2 was unable to use the word blank correctly in the sentence. And then you're actually going to quote the child's writing here. Okay. Let's check out a level 4. Explains and provides evidence of the children's use, attempted use. We've done that. And explains how the children's ability to use the vocab will develop understandings related to the learning experience. Ooh, going a step further. How this use develops content understandings. So you could say how evidence of children's vocabulary use demonstrates growth and or struggles in developing content understanding. So for example, all students could come up with a rhyming word by the end of the lesson when they were asked to, and most of the children were able to explain that it's changing. Okay, so this could work really nicely. Oh, good, it pasted perfectly. So I would then write something like this. All students could come up with descriptive words by the end of the shared writing lesson when they were asked to, and most of the children were able to explain that descriptive words are, and then you're going to explain what they are. That indicated to me that they clearly understood both the vocabulary words of sense words and descriptive, and also understood why we use descriptive words in our writing. Okay, so that's one example of how you might structure that response. And this one is how you are meeting students with distinct learning needs, how you're meeting their needs. I will work with some children who couldn't verbalize the explanation to help them see that changing the first sound. So to get to a level 5, you would add something about how did you support children who maybe speak English as a new language, and you could say something like, to help my English language learners in their development of the vocabulary, I could provide them with a list of relevant cognates, which are words that look and sound the same in English and Spanish. This would help them to see the connection so they can focus on the content of writing and descriptive language and not have to be burdened with learning English at the same time. Something like that could work, and that could get you to a level 5. Okay, so that's really just talking about the key vocabulary, and key vocabulary should include things like sense words, and you can actually list some. And then the word descriptive, because I imagine that you're going to teach your students descriptive writing. So you would want to provide that vocabulary. And whatever else you had in learning set in task 1 should be included here. Okay. The last question, hallelujah, we're almost there, this is super long, is using your assessment to inform instruction. So based on your analysis of the children's learning presented in the first question, that table and then the patterns that you found, describe next steps for instruction to impact the children's learning for the class and for the 2 focus students. And here you've got to have all students with IEPs and 504 plans. Anyone from your context for learning needs to be here. So based on your analysis of the assessments, what are your next steps? So based on my analysis of the students' writing rubric scores, my next steps for the whole class, for the whole group, will be explain. Let's take a look at what the rubric says you need to do here. So there's multiple criteria. The first one are your next steps are clear, and the second one is connecting to research and theory down here in part B. So at a level 3, the next steps focus on children's learning that's general for the whole class, not targeted for specific or individual children. So this would be just talking about the whole class. The support addresses learning related to the learning objectives that were assessed. So based on my analysis of the students' rubric scores, my next steps for the whole group will be include things like reteaching if needed, small group work to focus on the patterns of need that you found, or providing more scaffolding in language, writing, or vocabulary support. I think at a level 4, clearly aimed at the specific needs for individual children or groups with similar needs, addressing learning related to language and literacy. Should be explicit about how the next steps will strategically support individuals and explain how that support will address each child's needs in relation to the focus of the learning experience. Okay. So then after you talk about also emerging from my analysis of the focus children's writing rubrics, my next steps for focus student number 1 would be, and list off your next steps. My next steps for focus student number 2 would be, and list off your next steps for focus student number 2. Make sure that the next steps are related specifically to their literacy skills. I'm going to go back. And then the last part is here I would make sure that you focus back on what you wrote in the feedback section. So here you've already talked about your focus students' feedback that you're going to give and the strategies that you're going to suggest that they use. These ones, this one down here. So 2C, to help focus student 1, I'm going to have them do that. This can also be reiterated down here in 4A. So whatever you wrote for 2C for your focus students, you could reiterate down here in 4A. That would be a smart thing. Don't cut and paste. You should revise it and rewrite it so that it is applicable to this, but you could put that here because you've already done that for the focus students. So the new thing here is going to be what you say that you need to do for the whole class. And then explain how these next steps follow from your analysis of children's learning. The next steps I planned follow from my analysis of children's learning because I used the assessment evidence to plan. Specifically, for the whole group, my next steps relate to the whole group analysis because I did whatever you did. This relates to the research on, so let's say your next steps are you found that the whole class needed something retaught, so you're going to reteach. So specifically my next step of reteaching descriptive word writing relates to the whole group because I, found this as a pattern in their data. This relates to the research on, and then go find some research that says it's good to reteach content when it is not mastered. Okay? And then you're going to do this for Support children's learning. Do you do this for your focus students? Focused on specific children's learning needs related to. So I would say then do this same thing for specific children. And you could, it like makes sense to me to do it for your focus children. So the next steps, so you've already written about your next steps here for your specific focus children. So the next steps I planned, follow from my analysis of children's learning, because I'm specifically for focus child 1, my next step of blah, blah, blah relates to the research on blah, blah, blah. For focus student 2, my next steps of blah, blah, blah relates to my analysis because of this and relates to the research on blah, blah, blah. So this really requires you to do some research and to find some good strategies that are research-based, and then come back and write what you would do based on what you find in the research. Okay, so all of that has to be included. There's different ways that you can get higher scores of a 4 or even a 5. I think 5s are attainable on this rubric if you really just think about all of the things that they're asking and be super diligent in making sure that everything is included. Okay, I hope this is helpful. It's a lot of information. Work your way through it and catch all the little things, and you will be passing this task 3 of the edTPA. Good luck.